Holy moly, Glock just went and cleaned house, hard. Nearly half their catalog gone. Whole calibers vanished without so much as a heads up. Gen 4s, Gen 5s, even the MOS slides wiped right off the distributor sheets like they were never there. 1 minute, you had your pick of 357 SIGs and 45 G-Apes. Next minute, they were ghosts. And this wasn't just some quiet backroom reshuffle. This was big, real big. The Glock 22 alone lost more submodels than some entire handgun brands even offer. So what's the deal? Is Glock just tidying up the barn? Or are we watching the final stage before Gen 6 rolls off the line? In this video, we're talking about those vanished SKUs, the patents that showed up right behind them, and the signs that point to Glock finally joining the rest of the world in a modular, optics-ready future. From new takedown systems that don't need you to squeeze the trigger, to frame swaps that might finally work on a duty gun, we're piecing together the strongest case yet that Gen 6 is real and right around the corner. If you figured Gen 5 was the end of Glock's road, then you haven't seen what's brewing behind those factory walls in Austria. This ain't just slide cuts and serration tweaks. Something big is coming. Let's open it wide and have a look. Now, most Glock folks thought they'd already seen every SKU combo under the sun until early spring rolled around. That's when a leaked distributor email lit up every pistol forum and social feed out there. Line after line of part numbers just scrolling down the screen. Over 100 different models. Gen 4s, Gen 5s, even some MOS pistols now marked for the chopping block. The 357 SIG trio? Gone. The 45 GAP family? History. You could almost hear the collective double take. Why in the world would Glock trim a lineup that already looked skinny compared to the rainbow of options other gun makers crank out? Sure, discontinuations ain't new, but the scale of this one felt different. The Glock 22 alone was said to have lost 14 different variants, more than some companies make altogether. And if you took a look at Glock's own website, parts of the rumor mill checked out. The oddball calibers? Quietly pulled. And where ad banners used to sit, you'll now find a plain old discontinued tag. This looked like more than just routine stockroom cleanup. That's what kicked off the liveliest Glock bar talk since they ditched polygonal rifling in Gen 5. Some folks just shrugged, figuring demand for 40 cal service pistols and niche GAP loads had finally dried up. Others pointed toward standardization. Military and law enforcement units all over the world are moving to 9mm, no exceptions. And civilian shooters tend to follow along, because train-in ammo stays cheap and easy to find. Still, the size of the purge didn't quite make sense, unless a new production run was waiting in the wings. Glock's way of doing things doesn't include letting machines sit around gathering dust. So if half the catalog was being shelved, that floor space was likely marked off for whatever comes next. Talk of Gen 6, which used to be just range day speculation, suddenly started sounding a whole lot more believable, and that sent folks looking for real proof. Sure enough, the first clues showed up where most gun rumors go to die. The Patent Office. A whole stack of filings from Glock Technology GmbH between the years 2020 and 2025 showed more than just minor tune-ups. One grant, dated February 4th, 2025, number 12,215,944, lays out a drop-in trigger unit built to sit clean inside a standard trigger pocket. Another from April 1st, 2025 number 12,264,888 reworks the safety selector and locking lever layout so the pistol can be stripped down without needing to squeeze the trigger. Keep digging, and you'll find new design patents for both an upper and lower receiver, each one shaped with lines we've never seen on a factory Glock. None of those filings use the term Gen 6 in black and white. That name only exists in fanspeak. But when you overlay those diagrams on current frames, the tolerances drift just enough to suggest we're looking at a whole new platform. The no trigger pull takedown is the standout, mostly because it tackles one of Glock's longest-standing knocks. For decades, every armorer's class hammered the same drill. Clear the chamber, pull the trigger, then pinch the slide tabs. Problem is, folks got lazy, skipped that first part, and wound up with a hole in something that shouldn't have been shot. This new patent ditches that forced decock and replaces it with a locking lever that uncouples the striker without touching the trigger shoe. For the average range hand, that just means cleaning your gun with a little less drama. For the guy writing specs for a police academy, it removes a training risk and makes it easier to check all the approval boxes. Even California's roster, which grades handguns partly on drop safety systems, might take a second look at a Glock that strips like a SIG or an HK. Forum replies ran the usual gamut, from clapping to scoffing. One old-school shooter typed that, if you can't be trusted to check an empty chamber, you shouldn't even own a gun. Another fellow welcomed anything that might cut down on negligent discharges. Me? I stay practical. If a mechanical redesign keeps the same toughness while making user error less likely, there's no reason to complain. Glock already proved the concept over in Germany with the Glock 46 that was a rotating barrel setup that didn't need a trigger pull to come apart. Bringing that idea over to a good old tilting barrel lockup? That's a bigger engineering chore. But the patent language shows Glock's folks figured it out by adding a spring-loaded locking lever just behind the trigger axis. That lever steps in, stops the trigger bar during takedown, and only lets the slide move when the striker's blocked. For the dry fire crowd, you can still press the trigger for function checks. Armorers get a safer way to clean. Everybody walks away happy. The second headliner lives in what fans are calling the half-grip module. It ain't like SIG's P320 with that serialized fire control unit. Glock's patent sketches out a solid upper frame trigger group and all that mates up with grip shells you can swap out below the trigger guard. Think of it like trimming off the bottom half of a Gen 5 frame, then clipping on either a longer or shorter magazine shell. And since the real serialized receiver never leaves the gun, you can run a full-size grip at the range, switch to a compact shell for concealed carry, and still keep the same trigger feel across the board. If this ever hits store shelves, Glock might start selling grip kits the same way they sell backstraps now bundled up with spring-loaded pins ready to go. Of course, a patent don't mean a product's guaranteed, but the shapes and specs in document D1031899 line up a little too well with those forum sketches of the swappable lower. Not every old-school shooter's thrilled. Some folks see a frame split like that as a weak point, especially if those pins or fits get loose after tens of thousands of rounds. One machinist on Glock Talk piped up saying any load-bearing joint sitting halfway down the magazine well is bound to start wiggling loose with enough recoil. He might be right if Glock's just using plastic bosses. But the patent shows tongue and groove rails backed by metal inserts. That sounds a lot like how carbines are built where upper-lower fit has to stay rock solid to keep your groups tight. Until someone gets to put hands on one, all the talk about durability stays in the land of theory. Me? I'm more curious than skeptical. Glock's been real stubborn about not bringing back finger grooves or cheaping out with MIM parts. If they're finally stepping into modular territory, I'd bet they'll overbuild that latch system to the moon. Now, when it comes to optics, folks can argue about that near as much as they do trigger pull weight. The Gen 4 MOS setup? That was a patchwork plate system let you run a red dot, but it sat high and needed screws to stay put. Meanwhile, Springfield's Echelon and Ruger's RXM pushed the standard forward with direct mount slides that fit multiple footprints. Glock's answer looks to be what Aimpoint's calling the COA, an A-cut milled footprint that started showing up on limited Gen 5 runs. Word on the forum grapevine says Aimpoint's got a 1-year head start, after which other optics makers can start licensing the cut. Some folks are already groaning about yet another proprietary footprint, but the COA cut runs with twin recoil bosses and a centered cross slot, so adapter plates ought to still bridge out to Holosun or Trijicon mounts just fine. Patents don't name optics outright. Still, the upper receiver design patent granted in February of 2024 shows a squared-off window flanked by locating posts sitting right where the COA mount lands on test mule slides. That lines up real clean with the MOS SKU phase-out folks have been whispering about, suggesting Glock plans to build the A-cut straight into most Gen 6 slides instead of bundling plate kits. Now, while modular grips and optic cuts are stealing the spotlight, the drop-in trigger unit might end up being the quiet game changer. Patent number 12,215,944 outlines a fully self-contained trigger housing. It slides into a pocket in the frame, locks in with a pin, and brings its own leaf spring to the party. Sure, Glock's old-school trigger bar setup has always been easy to fine-tune, but this housing swap, that could let competition shooters run a 3-pound hybrid setup without touching a file. It also points toward Glock offering performance build. Think factory-installed aluminum shoes, curved bars, the works, and tacking on a few more bucks for the trouble. If you've been hoping for a real-deal factory GPT setup and a large-frame pistol, well, this is the first breadcrumb that might lead there. Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. Right now, the market's packed with S9s, Taurus GX4s, and a long line of Turkish and Brazilian knockoffs selling for half the sticker price of a Gen 5. These clones stay alive because Glock's been moving at a mule's pace, letting competitors copy that Gen 3, patent-expired architecture, and beat them on price. If, and it's still a big if, till Glock says so themselves, they roll out a more complex modular frame with new molds and machines, expect the MSRP to climb. A buddy at a big box FFL cracked up reading wish lists online, where folks were begging for price drops just because Glock stopped including a loader and brush. He's already calling a $20 hike just to cover the reworked slide cuts and new optic covers. But price always comes down to what you're getting. If Gen 6 slides bring aim-point-ready toughness without adapters, and the frame lets you swap from a Glock 17 length grip to a Glock 19 length in under a minute, most buyers will see the extra coin as money well spent. When they announce, it might matter near as much as what they're announcing. SHOT shows a blizzard of polymer hard to stand out. The NRA annual meetings? That's a tighter crowd, mostly gun media. Fewer toy drops muddying the headlines. Savvy gun makers know when to hold their water. Sometimes they wait for the noise to die down before making a splash, same way Sony skipped E3 and ran their own PlayStation showcase instead. So, folks saying Glock might unveil Gen 6 at the NRA meetings? That's not far-fetched. Come late spring, handgun junkies are starving for fresh news, and a Gen 6 drop would own podcasts, YouTube feeds, and every dusty Instagram page for weeks, not just a few hours. If those patents we just chewed through really tie into a full-blown product line, Glock's marketing crew's gonna want all the daylight they can get to spell out why this ain't just another facelift with front serrations and fancy cuts. Now we get to the question that's been haunting every group text between range buddies. Do you offload your Gen 5s while resale's still strong? Or hang on to them and wait until Gen 6 hits shelves? With discontinued models already starting to trickle down in price, I see opportunities both ways. Collectors who chase the oddball calibers are scooping up 45 gaps from pawn shops. Figure and parts and mags won't be around much longer. At the same time, budget-minded new shooters are grabbing up police trade-in G22s since 40 caliber ball ammo is cheap again. Now, if Gen 6 really brings safer takedown and built-in optics cuts, you better believe hobbyists will be unloading lightly used Gen 5 19s for under $400, just like we saw when Gen 5 shoved Gen 4 off the shelf. Here's how I see it. If a Glock you already own fills a clear roll carry, duty, competition, truck gun, hang on to it. But you ought to be stacking some cash for at least one Gen 6, so you can make up your own mind with it in your hand, not from keyboard chatter. Glock's own development rhythm gives us one last clue. Gen 4 hit back in 2010. Gen 5 landed in 2017. That 7-year stride points straight at 2024 or 2025 for the next evolution. Patents filed from 2020 through 2022 should have already gone from sketches to steel. And on the logistics side, the timeline's about right for a launch this season. If, for whatever reason, the whole new lineup gets bumped to next year, we might see a staggered rollout. Maybe the COA optic cut drops first on existing frames, with that modular lower following behind in separate SKUs. Either way, this train's already moving. You don't got 100 SKUs across the catalog just for giggles. Before I hand this conversation over to the outro, let's boil the speculation down into a workable plan of action. If you're content running iron sights, sticking with a standard grip, and cleaning your pistol the same way you did 10 years back? Then keep rocking the Glock you already own. That thing will keep humming along long after some high-dollar optic flashes its first dead battery. If, on the other hand, you've been itching for a direct mount red dot, want an easier field strip that clears out a training hazard, and like the sound of one serialized core that can shift from full-size duty to concealed carry length, then start putting some dollars aside now, because early demand's going to drive up prices same as it did when the MOS line rolled out. I'm personally budgeting for one of the first 9mm Gen 6s off the line, not because my Gen 5's fallen short, but because I want to see if Glock finally struck that rare balance between bare-bones simplicity and real-world flexibility in a way only they can. That patent sure makes it seem like they're taking that mission to heart. And that long list of discontinued models? That tells me they're making room and committing steel to it. All that's left is the official unveiling, and judging by all the talk floating around, that moment's coming up quick. So there you have it. Vanished SKUs, verified patents, and a whole market leaning in for Glock's next move. Gen 6 ain't official just yet, but every trail marker points to a big shift in how these pistols get built, bought, and carried. Now let me ask, would you trade in your Gen 5 for a modular lower? Does a no-trigger pull takedown fix a real problem? Or are they just tinkering with what wasn't broke? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay ahead of the curve before Glock makes it all official, go ahead and hit like, share it with your crew, subscribe, and give that bell icon a ring. The Gen 6 era may be closer than you think.